Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Thursday, February 22nd, 2018. It's 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and I'm sitting here with temperatures almost 35 to 40 degrees colder than what it was at this time yesterday. Actually, we went from highs in the upper 70s to near 80 at this time yesterday, and right now we're sitting in most areas in the low to mid 30s. That is, we usually, in some, maybe the most extreme cases, you'll see a 20 or 30 degree change in temperature. 40 to 45 degree temperature changes in 24 hours is kind of pushing the limit here. And not a surprise considering how absolutely radically stretched the rubber band was yesterday with regards to the warm pattern in the east. Now we're going into a weekend. Of course, we got to get through Friday. And there's a lot going on. We have a series of systems that are coming up out of the Gulf states through the middle Mississippi Valley and into the Northeast. It's going to bring some serious snow, let's call it, for parts of the upper Midwest. They're going to get it in waves. The first wave is coming along right now, and there'll be more happening as we go through the weekend. By the time this is all said and done, there are going to be areas with a foot to a foot and a half of new snow on the ground, and maybe some locally higher amounts. In the meantime, the extent of flood watches tonight run from northeastern Texas and northwestern Louisiana up through the middle Mississippi Valley, the lower Ohio Valley, on through southern Ohio and into western Pennsylvania. This area is going to wind up with pretty much a solid 2 to 3 inches of additional rain on whatever has fallen so far. And on the northern fringe of that, we have some winter weather advisories up for maybe a little bit of freezing rain tomorrow morning and some sleet along the New York-Pennsylvania border, on up into northeastern PA, south central New York State, and a few pockets even up into northeastern New York. A large area of winter weather advisories up tonight for northeastern Kansas on up through Iowa, the western 2/3 of Iowa, eastern Nebraska, also up into eastern South Dakota, much of Minnesota and Wisconsin and northern Michigan. And we are starting to see winter storm watches going up for parts of northwest Kansas and central Nebraska, northeastern Colorado. So that's going to be with respect to the third and stronger system. We had the first system move through the northeast today and out. The second one is coming for Friday, and that's impacting the Midwest right now with snow. And then the strongest one is over the weekend, and that's one that's going to produce some heavy snows for parts of, I'm thinking for northwestern Iowa, the northern third of Wisconsin through Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, eastern Nebraska. So we're probably going to see winter storm watches go up for the weekend system, and eventually, I wouldn't be surprised if we wind up seeing some blizzard warnings at some point for somebody here. Out in the west, we actually, I think, do have two blizzard warnings up for 2 Montana counties, and winter storm watches over parts of north central Montana, a little smattering of winter weather advisories through parts of Idaho, southwestern Oregon, and even a little winter storm warning up for one of the local counties there. And then we've got some scattered around from California on up into parts of northern Nevada, also western Nevada and eastern Nevada, but there's kind of a hole open right in the middle, back through western Utah. I should say that was more western Utah and not eastern Nevada, and parts of western Colorado. So pretty busy weather map. It's still, the pattern is still relatively mild in the east overall, but much of the nation experiencing some late February wintertime conditions here. I want to start off, though, before we go to that, I'm going to start because I want to go back over to take a look at what's going on with our friends over in Europe, because here we have a pretty interesting scenario, and I want you to see how this is all going to play out, because it's all related to the pattern, the blocking pattern that's going to evolve next week across the North Atlantic, which is going to impact the weather throughout the entire United States, especially the east later next week. But I want to bring up the temperatures. We were doing this. I'm going to show you this is the extent of above and below normal temperatures. And it's pretty cold at the moment throughout much of Europe. And it's very cold in Siberia and western Russia. But we've got a wave of cold of Siberian air that is going to be migrating west-southwestward, and you can see how it just spreads out and takes over virtually all of Europe by early next week, with temperatures running, now this is in degrees Celsius, but in these brighter purples here, we're talking, 15, let's average it out, 15 degrees Celsius below normal, so that's a good 25 degrees below normal, 25 or more degrees below normal over a really large area. And that cold air spreads all through Western Europe, right over to the British Isles, to Ireland, and that is going to dominate the weather scene probably through much of next week. Gradually, some moderation takes place across Italy and down into Greece and Turkey, the warmer air shooting northeastward, but the cold air is kind of arcing over the top into northwestern Europe and then dropping down into Western Europe, into France and Spain, even down into North Africa. This is really cold air for this time of year, and whether this comes with any snow or not remains to be seen. One of the earlier snow maps that we had for the next 10 days was very bullish on the snowfall for much of Western Europe. These are some pretty hefty amounts in centimeters, especially over parts of England, where we've got some 20 and 30 and even some 40 centimeter amounts being shown in some areas in northern England. But the whole country gets into some up to 25 centimeters of snow, and even Ireland in the southeastern portion getting up to about 15, 20 centimeters on the forecast map. Now, whether this plays out remains to be seen, but I would just suggest that you're certainly going to see some snow. I don't know, whether it's going to be as extensive as the GFS is, but the cold does look pretty dominant here. And when we roll out the surface map, those easterly winds with the Arctic air coming across the North Sea and into England, and this is on Monday and Tuesday of next week, and you can see that there are snows there being generated. There's also a rather impressive storm that models have been picking up on in several runs coming up from the south. You can see it here off the coast of Portugal. This is for later next week, and it swings up northward, and look at the wide area of snow that it produces over England to Scotland and to France, and some heavy snows at that. And that low just kind of rotates around for a couple of days. So this might be interesting with all this cold air around. If an upper air storm kind of gets locked away there for a little while and just rotates around, somebody could wind up with a lot of snow out of this. Now, I'm not well versed on how weather works over in Europe in terms of how these lows react and what they produce and the tracks. There's a lot of strange things I'm seeing that only because I've never really paid that close attention before. But it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this plays, and we're going to watch it closely over the coming days. I also want to show you, by the way, we've been talking about this blocking pattern that's going to develop, and I want to put up the upper air as this is the hemispheric view. Basically, you're just kind of looking at the Earth almost as if we're looking at it from the top down. And I'm going to put the upper air winds here because it's pretty interesting how blocks work. So we'll start at the beginning, and up here's green. Up near the middle of the picture, you've got Greenland, where you see the browns just to the north of that. That is higher pressure that's beginning to build, that block beginning to build. And I know you have to kind of look at it sideways. You certainly recognize the United States. But if you go across the Atlantic, you come to Spain and France and England. It's just sort of tilted on its side. But if we move this along, look at the brown and purple, expanding brown and purple area over the polar regions there between Greenland and Scandinavia. This is what we refer to as an east-based block, all right? And when we have an east-based block, as we have through the weekend, we tend to have warmer than average temperatures in the eastern part of the United States. You still have this deep trough in the west, but you can see how this east-west block, how extensive it is, running across from the British Isles, north of Scandinavia, through the Arctic regions, north of Siberia. So it basically traps, there are 3 upper lows that are evident to the south of that. One that's sitting up in just north of northern Canada, another one that's sort of extended from the first, that's off the south coast of Greenland. And if you go south from there, there's a stretching trough where a 3rd upper low is about to form near the Azores. So you can see how these systems are sort of held there by the block. Nothing much is moving. Now there's that Azore system blowing up. You can see it there in the dark, dark blue. But here's the block as it starts to move westward. But you'll notice, remember, winds are clockwise around highs. So you've got a clockwise wind aloft around the block across northern Siberia, northern Europe toward England. That is pushing the Siberian air westward from Siberia into Western Europe and into the British Isles. The block is holding it in place, and then gradually you're going to see that upper high move into and over Greenland. Now, once that starts to happen and the block shifts westward, that causes the jet stream in the United States to get displaced well to the south of normal. And you can see out in the Atlantic, we have storms, upper air storms along and north of 40 degrees north. So the jet stream is shifting way south of normal. And that also means, by the way, while we have this in place like this, that storm tracks across the United States are going to be much further to the south. So this is a really good illustration of just how blocks work. They just basically redistribute it, the general west to east flow. There's in that brown area that covers the whole center part of this picture, that is all higher than average pressures, and the lower than average pressures are displaced well to the south. So no doubt that we're going into this. It is going to happen. The problem from the standpoint of day-to-day forecasting is once the block really gets underway and starts to influence your weather, as we've seen it happen a few times, you get these atmospheric indices that we use to measure the strengths of pressure changes around the northern hemisphere. They are going to be at extreme levels, and models have a difficult time handling that. And we saw that today on today's runs. But I will again say that with blocking like this, the puzzle pieces are there for something important to happen in the eastern part of the United States late next week, and possibly again beyond that. In the meantime, we just have to sit and wait and see how these puzzle pieces come together, because that is the big variable here. Now, let's roll to the short term, because we have much going on here that we want to talk about with respect to our current weather and what's going to happen this weekend. So this first weather system in the east came through today with not too much fanfare, a little bit of sleet and snow in the colder areas just to the north of New York City and Long Island and southernmost New England, but even there it really didn't amount to too much. And then you've got the area of rain through the lower and up to getting ready to move into the middle Mississippi Valley, and snow up through northern Nebraska and up through northwestern Iowa, and an area of ice that exists in between. And you can also see the snows out in the west, in California, Nevada, and in the Rockies. And there's your second system. This is the first one is in the east on this first shot here. The second one is the one that's from East Texas on up into Arkansas. More rain for you, Franklin. And then the third one is the system that's back out in the west. So the second one comes along and that moves up into the Great Lakes So then you get a break. And here's the one that I think is going to be problematic for areas from eastern Nebraska, maybe even into parts of north central Kansas, but particularly, southeastern Nebraska into northwestern Iowa, southern Minnesota, and eventually up into the northwestern third of Wisconsin, given the low track, some heavy snows. And this would be for later Saturday into Sunday. That low really intensifies as it moves up over Lake Superior. So I would not be surprised at all to see blizzard warnings up at some point. More action comes in to the Pacific Northwest, and we also have the system in the Great Lakes with the cold front with the front that swings out from that down into the Gulf states, and you've got a warm front that's kind of pinched out across Virginia and off the Delaware coast. So there's probably going to be some heavier rains up in through parts of Pennsylvania, New York State, and maybe even to me in southeastern New York before this all moves out later Sunday afternoon. So this is going to be a pretty busy next 3 days in terms of precipitation. In fact, we'll put the total accumulated precip up, and you can see this swath where you start to get into the white and then the purples into the shadings. I guess that's salmon color. I'm not sure what color that is, but inside this whitish area, that is all 2 inches plus. You can see the scale on the side. So there's probably some 3 and 4 inch total rainfalls that are being indicated here. A lot of these areas, some of these areas have been very dry for a long time, so this rain is coming none too soon. But other areas where there are flood watches up, we've got problems because of the fact that there has been ample rainfall with the active pattern we've had over the last couple of weeks. In the Northwest and in the western part of the United States, also some rainfall amounts in excess of two or more inches just inland of the coast of Oregon and Washington. Now, with snow, how is this going to work out? Well, we'll do the 10-to-1 ratio. Through Sunday, let me just back away just a little bit. So this is to 1 a.m. Monday morning, and you can see the heavier snow amounts on the order of, let's call it a large band of 8 to 12 inches that'll fall from maybe easternmost Nebraska through northwestern Iowa, northwestern Wisconsin, southeastern Minnesota, and on north and east of there. So a fair amount of snow being indicated there. The western mountains in Washington and Oregon showing amounts of a foot plus. And as we scroll through the 10-day period, this is the 18Z GFS, by the way, so it was a little different from the 12 in the long range. But more snow forecast to fall in areas where we've been, basically seeing it for this week, where we're going to be seeing it this weekend. But models are going to be kind of crazy in the long range here, so I'll show you some of the craziness. Let's jump to the European model today because people are talking about this, and I'll put up a better looking map. I don't particularly care for this one, but we'll put up just, this is the surface map. I'm just trying to see what day I am at, and this is not the right one. This is the right one. So the European, and we'll back it away so we can watch the progression every 24 hours. Of course, that's the this is for Saturday here. Here comes that next low that runs up to the Great Lakes and intensifies pretty rapidly, much like the GFS has. And then we start to get into that building block. So as a result, next week's weather in the east is probably going to be pretty quiet for a few days until late in the week. Low pressure starts to come out of the west. It's going to try to make a run toward the Ohio Valley, but the block is going to begin to suppress that to the south. And one of the things that I'm going to look for is whether the models are dropping pressures too far northwest in this situation, that in fact everything would be further south. The European winds up with a low that basically develops east of New Jersey, south of Long Island, but it has such a strong opinion, let's call it, of this block to the north that it has this storm doing a rather unusual thing, intensifying rapidly and then dropping almost straight southward. You can see there's a wrapped up gale center here. This is next Saturday on the European. A wrapped up gale east of New Jersey, south of Cape Cod, and that's next Saturday. Next Sunday, the low actually drops straight south and is still along the east coast. The block impacting weather systems to move in odd ways, where they would normally try to move from west to east. They may move east to west or south, north to south. It's unusual, really unusual to see this, and I have to tell you, it is not unusual for models to do this when they're looking at these things in the long range, and then when you get into the short range, they resume a bit more of a normal motion that's more west to east, or perhaps it may be more northwest to southeast. I'm not really sure. This is a pretty strong block we're dealing with, and we're going into March, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some really strange things happen. We'll go bring up the upper air, and you can see how wrapped up this system is. I'm going to go wide. And there's your big block up near Greenland, and you can see the jet is basically suppressed to the south of normal. Energy starts to come in out of the Great Lakes and drop southeastward because it can't lift up northeastward like it would want to because of that big upper high over Greenland. And it just wraps itself up off the east coast, and then the block forces it to move almost straight south. We don't really have, we only go out to day 10 on the European, but I will show you the GFS, and I'm going to go back this way. I'm comparing apples to apples in a sense. I'll go back one run, and we can watch the GFS's view of all this. Same idea, but again, how each model handles this blocking pattern is going to really determine where we're going with this. And here comes that energy. Later next week, actually we're beyond next week now at this point. The GFS on the earlier run really didn't do too much with this first system. It has it there, but it didn't wrap it up the way the European did. It actually was hinting that there might be more with something beyond that down the road. So again, models have their different views of how blocks are going to impact the developing weather systems going forward once we get past this weekend. And in fact, if we look at the teleconnections, when we look at how measuring the strength of all these pressure changes around the globe, bring that up to the top here. Your Pacific North America index is at its absolute most negative reading today, and it starts to rise and rise fairly rapidly to where it goes neutral and then goes positive actually right toward the end. The NAO is at its most positive reading today as well, and that's crashing to go negative over the weekend, and then gets off the wall negative during next week before it starts to approach the neutral line. And your EPO is kind of going back and forth here, but even that too approaches the neutral line toward the end of the period. So, this is one of the, that signal date around, I was saying March 5th to the 8th might be where we ring the bell here. I don't know if the European is right in its view of having this big storm for the end of next week. Other models are much different, and we're going to just, we always have to kind of wait every day as we get closer and closer to figure these things out. That's definitely the case here with the blocking scenario that we have. There's no way for me to even speculate as to which model has the better handle on all of this. But definitely interesting times that we're living in. And we haven't seen a good strong block like this in a long, long time. Okay? I mean, you might have to go back to 2010 or 2011 to see something like this. The people who follow this on a regular basis, they're saying you have to go back to that winter of 2010, 2011 to see blocking this strong. So it's been very, very elusive. I did touch on the Pacific Northwest, Taco Bell, as the weather up there. Weather systems keep coming in. It's kind of cold out there in the west, but most of the action is going to be in the plains, the upper Midwest and in the Northeast, and of course the blocking being the big player here. The PNA goes positive, and then David Schwartz, do not focus, don't get too wrapped up in all of that. That changes somewhat every day. Plus the fact that usually what happens is when those indexes are making a rapid change, whether they're going from deeply negative to neutral, as they make that accelerated rise, or in some cases if they're going from positive to neutral and making an accelerated decline, at the point where they're doing that is usually a time where you get storm development. So don't, if that's what you're thinking, that's where your head is at with this, take a breath, because it's not necessarily a negative thing for you to see the teleconnections behaving the way they are. The overall scheme is important, and that's going to play itself out when we get into next week. So let's just go step by step here. And by the way, usually with these blocks, when they're this strong, models tend to break them down too fast. So don't be too shocked if you come in, you see the North Atlantic blocking high wind up hanging around a bit longer than what models have. The over-under for snow and ice slip reaver for March, you're taking 8 inches is the number. Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take lower. Okay? I'm going to take lower. I don't, not for any other reason other than the fact that I know whichever one I take, it's going to come out the opposite, but I will stand on the lower side. Okay? Let's see. Patrick B. remembers as a kid 6 to 8 years ago, a strong low came up the East Coast and spun around in a counterclockwise turn, and you got hit twice, receiving over a foot of snow. Well, you know what? I can remember some pretty unusual events that occurred back in the 2000 to 2010 span, where weird things like that happened. So March can be famous for that, especially when you have North Atlantic blocking. Tom Adams, you're focusing too much on the heights, okay? And that is not necessarily a good measure of how cold it may or may not be at the bottom of the atmosphere. Just bear that in mind, okay? You could have pretty cold air at the bottom part of the atmosphere with higher than average heights. So I think you're putting too much emphasis in that. I don't know what it's going to be. The Siberian air, we know that the air the really cold air from Siberia is not coming eastward. It's going westward. That means that the air that we're going to have is the more standard colder Canadian air, which can be cold and can be formidable sometimes, depending. But we're not going to really know too much about that until we get closer to it. And the heights in Canada are going to be high because you have a blocking high. That's just the way it works. Let's see. James Hines, the pattern is fitting with the Euro ensembles that the Northeast will be above normal during March. No snow, no surprise. I'm sorry, I'm kind of not understanding that. The pattern is fitting with the Euro ensembles that the Northeast will be above average. I'm not sure. I didn't look at the Euro ensemble, so I'm not 100% sure what you saw. I don't know, Joshua Pan, if the 50-50 drought, if the 50-50 low is going to favor us this time until we see if and how it sets up. And that is the big question. Let's see. Strong block, is that why Sandy Hook left and not go out to sea? Well, there was blocking in place, and there was a displaced upper low in the southern in the Gulf state that dropped down into the Tennessee Valley in the Gulf states, as I remembered it, and it basically forced Sandy to rotate up and around it, and the NAO was negative at that time. So yes, it did play a role. If the NAO, David Schwartz is correct, if the NAO is too negative, storms get suppressed way to the south, and that's another possibility to consider. Let's see. Cold air is always an issue, Delvin, just so we know. You know, it's never handed to you on a silver platter. About the winters that where cold air really wasn't an issue was 13, 14, and 14, 15. You had plenty of it, and it didn't suppress many of the weather systems too far south. So, yeah, but most of the time you're always fighting some kind of a battle with regards to cold air and how much you have, and where it's placed, where the high is. And yes, Snowfin 21, I need a haircut. I know that. I am going to try and get one this weekend. I was thinking about that just today. I got to text my hair guy and let him know. Watch the trends, Seth. That's all we can do at this point. Okay, so look, folks, we got a good you got a good feel here of what's going on. We're gonna have a lot of fun over the next couple of weeks, watching all of this evolve and move around, and we'll keep an eye on things also in Europe as well, with the impending cold. Whether that winds up also with a lot of snow, we'll see. No, Reaver, it is not a toupee. This is all my real hair, for God's sake. I buzz it down. You've seen it buzzed all the way down. It's my real hair, and it's my real hair color. Okay. Delvin wants my live stream schedule. Okay, tomorrow is Friday, so let's shoot for 6 o'clock Eastern time. I want to do it a little early on Friday, so we'll go 6 o'clock Eastern time for a Friday live stream. And over the weekend, as usual with the weekend live streams, it's kind of tough for me to schedule them ahead of time because I'm off. So, but I also got stuff to do. But we will definitely get live streams in over the weekend, probably more in the evening than earlier in the day. And you know, watch for the live stream schedule. I'll post the time as soon as I know. I will post the time up, and this way you can plan accordingly. Joe and Joe Show, Tim Veltman, tonight at 9:15 on Facebook, so you can certainly join us there. And latest website posts on meteorologistjoecioffi.com. Thank you so much. We'll see you later on Facebook and tomorrow right here on my YouTube channel.